Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to Star Trek Stories. Wow. I am your creator and host, Jaron Hatch. It's been a hot second, everyone. Thank you for your patience and forbearance. I was hoping to get this chunk of episodes out much earlier, but as happens in life happened. Scheduling difficulties, health difficulties, a few little things all piled up all at the same time, which made it hard to get these episodes out in a timely fashion. But I'm happy to say here we are for our last set of episodes for this 100 episode list we've been checking out. Very excited to have you all here. Thank you. Thank you for those of us who've been here for the long haul. Thank you for sticking with us. Couldn't do it without y'all. When last we all met, we didn't actually watch Star Trek. We were here for Nerd Movie 7, Akira. Yes, our friends Will, Leah, and Adriana were all here for Akira, and we were all appropriately traumatized. I don't think we've ever been so speechless after an episode or movie on this podcast. So yeah, it was an experience to be sure. And this was also the final Nerd Movies episode for this 100 Star Trek episode list we've slowly been working through. Oh no! For those new to the podcast, we have been watching non-Star Trek movies when we're in between chunks of Star Trek episodes. We've done 7 of them. We've done Star Wars, The Batman, Jaws, Mad Max Fury Road, Blade Runner, Interstellar, and now Akira. Definitely go check those out if you haven't. We had a lot of fun with all of those. They were great. Nerd Movie 7 was also our last episode with my good friend Mark Nielsen as co-host. No, sad times indeed. Mark was here for the last batch of Star Trek episodes we watched, where we looked at the franchise's efforts to reinvigorate itself at the end of its golden age, particularly with the prequel series, Star Trek Enterprise, as well as the final Next Generation movie, Star Trek Nemesis. While the chunk was something of a mixed bag, Mark and I definitely had a blast watching them, and his silliness will be missed. So be sure to check those out if you already haven't. So yes, now that we're headed into our next and final batch of episodes for this 100 episode list, what does that mean for our podcast? Will I be flying solo for this last chunk? Well, yes and no. Yes, in the fact that I will not have a dedicated co-host for this episode selection, but no, in that I will be going completely solo. So what does that mean exactly? Well, before I get into the hosting logistics, let's catch up on where we are in this 100 Star Trek episode list. So for those new to the podcast, we have been going through a curated 100 episode list that we have titled Venturing into the Universe, where we're doing a big overview of the entire Star Trek franchise from 1964 to 2022. It's not the greatest hits list. It's more of an imperfect snapshot of the good, the bad, and the mid. We've broken this list into a bunch of chunks covering the main eras and series of the franchise. We covered the first main era classic Trek, where we looked at the original series, the animated series, and the original film series. Basically, everything with the original cast. For the second main era, Golden Age Trek, we've actually been covering this over the last several segments. Golden Age Trek is that magical time when the franchise was at its most popular, when there was constant Star Trek on from 1987 to 2005, spanning multiple series, hundreds of episodes, and a few movies. If you're interested in any of that, we broke it up into a few chunks. Those being the growing pains of the next generation, the TNG Renaissance, the TNG glory years, Deep Space Nine and the end of TNG, Voyager, and the waning Enterprise. So at this point, the Golden Age is officially over, and the franchise went on a bit of a hiatus for a few years. No new TV shows or movies. All of the production people that had been working on the franchise since 1987 had moved on. The franchise head honcho Rick Berman tried to hold on to it and reignite it, but to no avail. Star Trek was more or less dead, at least for now. But a valuable IP like Star Trek is only going to stay dormant for so long before the powers that be decide to bring it back. And it would indeed eventually return from the grave, but with a whole new creative team and a whole new look. I should also note that during this time there were lots of rights issues with the franchise. Around the time Golden Age Trek was ending, Viacom, the big corporate owners of the franchise, split. This split led to the film rights going to Paramount Pictures and the TV rights going to CBS. So bringing the franchise back would be a bit more complicated than it had been in the past. But it did make it back, both on the big screen and the small screen, and is still currently going now. So yes, this newest and current era is what we're going to be checking out in this last chunk on our 100 episode list. An era that I like to call Modern Trek. Oh boy, everyone, here we go. So yes, Modern Trek. This era could also be called Streaming Trek, as this era mostly covers the current streaming Star Trek universe on Paramount Plus, or what it was actually called originally, CBS All Access. Most of this era spans from 2017 to the current day, though there were a few things that preceded it. There are currently a couple hundred episodes that span over a few different series, which easily makes this the second biggest era of Star Trek, though it's still a ways off from Golden Age Trek. However, for how relatively big this era is, we are only going to be watching 10 episodes from it. This whole 100 episode list was weighed by both how many episodes each series has and its overall impact on the franchise. Since Modern Trek is still actively happening, and this podcast has a bit of a retrospective bent, it's still hard to fully gauge its impact. So we're only going to be doing 10 for this era. But this is going to make for an interesting and I hope fun episode selection because it's going to be a little different than all the others we've done. With most of the other episode selections we've done, they were mostly dedicated to one show, with the biggest exception being Deep Space Nine and the end of TNG. With this, we are going to be looking at 7 different series in a 10 episode span. So much more of a sampler platter than the others. And more specifically, we're going to be watching the beginnings of all of these series. It's going to be a kind of pilot season here on Star Trek Stories. And we can kind of take a look at which series we think does the best at making a first impression in this modern era. But what exactly are these 7 series we're going to be watching the beginnings of? Well, let's take a look. First off, in this current streaming Star Trek universe, we have 3 main live-action shows: Discovery, Picard, and Strange New Worlds. So let's start with Star Trek Discovery. Star Trek Discovery was the show that kick-started the entire current streaming Star Trek universe, but is probably the hardest show to describe. The best way I can describe Star Trek Discovery is that this is Star Trek's attempt to do a prestige genre show in the vein of something like Game of Thrones, at least in its initial conception. This show centers around Spock's human foster sister, Michael Burnham, and her cosmic odyssey, for lack of a better term. After that, we get Star Trek Picard. Star Trek Picard. Yeah, as the name suggests, this is a legacy sequel that was kind of in vogue around this time. This was inspired by films like Star Wars: The Last Jedi and most directly the X-Men movie Logan. This show follows an older Jean-Luc Picard, again played by the legendary Sir Patrick Stewart, in the twilight of his years and having to face the demons from his past. And then we get Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Strange New Worlds is probably best described as a remix of the 1960s original series, or a theoretical if the original show were made in the 2020s. It's set aboard the classic Starship Enterprise, but on the 5-year mission right before Captain Kirk's classic mission, with the ship instead being captained by the literal OG Star Trek captain, Christopher Pike. Since Discovery and Picard are more singular, character-focused, serialized dramas, Strange New Worlds was made to be more of a classic episodic Star Trek to keep the original spirit alive. So yeah, those are the 3 main live action series of this time period for now. But during this era, we also got 2 animated series. The first time the franchise has done animation since the original 1970s animated series. In this modern era, we get Lower Decks and Prodigy. Yeah, so Star Trek Lower Decks first is the franchise's first attempt at a dedicated comedy. Lower Decks is inspired by the TNG episode of the same name, Lower Decks, which we've watched on the podcast. And it follows the lowest ranking junior officers aboard one of Starfleet's least important ships. It's very Rick and Morty-esque, but instead of being nihilistic, it's super optimistic, and it's very much a love letter to the Star Trek franchise. And then we get Star Trek Prodigy. Star Trek Prodigy is the one for the kids, but is also secretly the most Star Trek show to ever Star Trek. This one was a co-production with Nickelodeon to create a show that was both aimed at a younger audience, as well as a show that was specifically created to introduce new viewers, as a whole, to the world of Star Trek. I like to describe this one as characters from a Star Wars show discovering the Star Trek universe. So yeah, those are the 5 main series of this time period. I should say, in addition to these main series, we do also have a series of shorts. The first time the franchise has ever played with this format. These are all under the appropriate label of Star Trek short treks. I don't know. These were made to be a few things. Little Star Trek experiments, as well as supplemental and promotional material. Yeah, these are strange little oddities in the Trek canon, but they are part of the official episode count. So we are going to watch one on our 100 episode list. So yeah, that covers the main streaming Star Trek universe on Paramount Plus. But before we get to any of that, we are going to watch another Star Trek movie. Wow! How spoiled are all of you? Essentially getting back-to-back Star Trek movies, even if Nemesis was a complete train wreck. Yeah, so, yes, what is this movie we're going to watch? So, yes, before this current streaming Star Trek universe, we got a trilogy of reboot movies, which had a huge impact, both tonally and stylistically, on these current streaming shows. It does bear mentioning that one of the main writers for these films, Alex Kurtzman, is one who went to oversee the streaming Star Trek universe. So you could call this entire era Kurtzman Trek, as many people do. He's the creative glue holding this whole era together, for better or for worse. So yes, this movie, way back in the late 2000s, the aughts, only a few years after the Golden Age died, Paramount was already interested in rebooting Star Trek. And for the first time, they wanted to take pre-existing characters and reimagine them in a modern context. In this case, the original 60s crew, and still arguably the most iconic crew. We never really got an origin story or first mission for the original crew like we did the other shows. So it was decided that that's what this reboot movie was going to be, but with new, younger actors and better, more modern special effects. Yeah, so with all that, they got up-and-coming director J.J. Abrams, who would eventually go on to bring back Star Wars on the big screen as well, to spearhead this bold new reboot vision of the original Star Trek crew, as well as a new cast led by the very up-and-coming Chris Pine as a young James T. Kirk. And in fact, I personally like to call these movies the Chris Pine movies. With all this new blood, but a touch of something classic, the idea was to create something fresh, something exciting, but familiar. And that's what we're going to be getting next week on the podcast, the 2009 Star Trek movie. Yeah, I'm excited for this. I will admit I have some qualms with this era of Star Trek, but I do have a special place in my heart for, at the very least, this first movie we're going to be watching. So I am pumped to be watching it all again with you guys. But what about a regular co-host? Well, for this episode selection, we're going to be doing something a little different. We're going to be doing a pilot season here on Star Trek Stories. We're going to be cultivating, in quotes, test audiences for these shows and seeing what sticks. This is going to be something new for our podcast, and I hope you are as excited as I am to be exploring modern Trek. This whole era is defined by this idea of there is, instead of one Star Trek show for everyone, there is a Star Trek show for everyone. And what I mean by that is, like, there are multiple Star Trek shows for different kinds of people. So we're going to be breaking this stuff up, and I'm going to be really curious as to how all this plays out. So yes, next week, starting all of this off, Star Trek 2009. Exciting times, my goodness, another Star Trek movie. First off, returning to the show, we have one of my best friends in the whole wide world. Toby Simmons is going to be coming back to the podcast. They were previously on for Nerd Movies 3 Jaws. And most recently, they were on for Deep Space Nine Duet, their first regular episode of Star Trek. Wow. Yeah, they're going to be joining us for this silly little Star Trek movie, as they are still very much a Star Trek newbie. Also coming back on from Nerd Movies 5, Blade Runner, we have our good friend Natty Taylor watching this with us. Natty is a delightful human being that I'm thrilled is returning to the show. Natty is also a noob, though I do believe that they may have seen this film once before. But we'll have to see. I'm not sure. They may have forgotten it. So we have a unique case of someone who may have seen this, but isn't sure of their first impression. And finally, my friend and my metamour, Dallas Fawson, is going to be returning to the podcast. Dallas is mostly a Star Trek noob. He was on before for TNG. He came on for The Wounded. Fantastic episode. But he has not seen these Chris Pine films. And Dallas is something of a film nerd. So I'm going to be really curious as to what he thinks about these reboot films. He is not a franchise guy. He is not a modern blockbuster guy. Dallas is the kind of... Dallas is who I watch The Night of the Hunter with. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, that's what Wikipedia is for. Dallas is the kind of friend you watch Night of the Hunter with. Fantastic movie. So I'm very curious as to what Dallas has to say about Star Trek 09. Very curious. And I know I said we weren't going to be having a dedicated co-host for this chunk of episodes, but I will be having an honorary co-host for this first episode, the 2009 Star Trek movie. This is someone whose first Star Trek is, in fact, the 2009 Star Trek, due in no small part to myself. This is my best friend, my partner in crime, my bunny friend, my favorite person in the whole wide world. Jenny Beal is going to be coming on as my honorary co-host for this film. They started their Star Trek journey because of me with this movie. I created a 50 episode list for a newbie to get into Star Trek. And then when we started dating, I was like, well, I have to put this list to the test, and you're going to watch it with me. And the 2009 Star Trek film was the first entry on the list. So this is going to be their first rewatch in Star Trek. Jenny and I have watched a lot of Star Trek together, but we haven't rewatched something together. This is going to be the first thing we watch together. And I spoiler alert, I know they're not going to really like this on a rewatch, but I am very excited to rewatch it with them. Hell yeah, I'm excited. I'm really excited. Oh, spoiler, I don't particularly care for this era, but I am excited to watch it with you all. And I'm excited to watch it with who we have coming next. Next time, Modern Trek begins. Star Trek 09. Toby Simmons, Natty Taylor, Dallas Fawson, Jenny Beal. Really excited to get into this whole era with you all. Modern Trek, our final chunk of episodes for our 100 episode list. We'll see you all then.